The untouched plate sat between us like evidence at a crime scene. Tommy's chicken parmesan, his absolute favorite, growing cold while he pushed green beans around with his fork. Laura smiled encouragingly from across the table, but my 8-year-old son barely looked up from his barely touched dinner. My name is Dr. David Richardson. I'm 45 years old, head of pediatric cardiology at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia, and I've spent the last 2 years trying to rebuild a normal life for my son after losing his mother to breast cancer. 6 months ago, I thought I'd found the missing piece when I married Laura Chen. Intelligent, nurturing, and seemingly perfect with children. Now, watching Tommy's third consecutive dinner of picking at his food, I was starting to wonder if I'd made a terrible mistake. "Sorry, Daddy," Tommy whispered, his voice barely audible. "I'm just not hungry." His small hand pushed the plate away, and I noticed how thin his wrists had become. In 3 weeks of marriage, my son had lost nearly 8 pounds, a significant amount for a 60-pound child. Laura reached over and touched Tommy's shoulder gently. "Sweetheart, you need to eat to grow big and strong. Your daddy worked hard to make this special dinner for you." Her voice carried the perfect tone of concerned stepmother, but Tommy flinched slightly at her touch. I caught the subtle movement and filed it away with growing unease. The change in Tommy had been immediate and dramatic. Before the wedding, he'd been excited about having a new mommy. He'd helped pick out flowers for the ceremony and had proudly walked down the aisle carrying our rings. But the morning after our honeymoon, everything shifted. Tommy became quiet, withdrawn, and stopped eating normal portions during meals. My parents had attributed it to natural adjustment stress when they visited last week. "David, you found a wonderful woman," my father had said during their visit. "Laura reminds me so much of your mother at that age. Nurturing, intelligent, devoted to family." My mother had been equally impressed, spending hours discussing child psychology and educational strategies with Laura. They'd left convinced that Tommy just needed time to accept his new family structure. "He's just adjusting to having me around," Laura said later as we cleaned up the kitchen. "It's completely normal for children to act out when family dynamics change. I've read extensively about blended family psychology." I nodded, wanting to believe her. Laura had a master's degree in child psychology from Columbia and worked as a family therapist before we met at a medical conference. She understood childhood trauma, adjustment disorders, and the complex emotions of grieving children. If anyone could help Tommy through this transition, it should be her. But something felt fundamentally wrong. In my 20 years of pediatric practice, I'd learned to trust my instincts about children's behavior. Tommy wasn't acting out. He was genuinely afraid of something. Laura had seemed perfect during our 6-month courtship. She'd volunteer at children's hospitals, organized grief support groups, and had even published research on helping children cope with parental loss. When she started bringing Tommy small gifts and involving him in planning our wedding, I thought I'd found the ideal partner to help us heal as a family. "Maybe we should consider family counseling," Laura suggested the next evening as Tommy once again left his dinner untouched. "I have colleagues who specialize in blended family therapy. It might help Tommy process his feelings about accepting me as his new mother figure." I looked at my son, remembering how different he'd been just months ago. Before cancer took Sarah, Tommy had been a chatty, curious kid who asked endless questions about everything from how hearts worked to why the sky was blue. Sarah used to joke that Tommy inherited my analytical mind and her stubborn determination. "He's going to be a doctor just like his daddy," Sarah had said during one of our last conversations in the hospital. "Promise me you'll nurture that curiosity, David. Don't let anyone dim his light." Tommy's light was definitely dimming, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Laura's presence was somehow connected to it. The boy who used to pepper me with questions about my surgeries now barely spoke during dinner conversations. Everything came to a head 2 weeks later when my parents insisted on hosting a family dinner to properly welcome Laura into the Richardson family. They'd driven down from New York specifically for the occasion, bringing Sarah's grandmother's china and planning an elaborate meal to show their approval of my new wife. "We're so thrilled that you've found someone," my mother confided, as we set the table with Sarah's inherited dishes. Laura is exactly what this family needs: educated, compassionate, and wonderful with children. Tommy just needs time to see how lucky he is. Laura had spent the afternoon preparing what she called her signature family feast: herb-crusted lamb with roasted vegetables and her special botanical tea blend. She'd been unusually focused on the meal preparation, spending extra time in her garden selecting specific herbs and carefully measuring ingredients in ways that seemed almost clinical. Tommy had been more withdrawn than usual, staying close to me and avoiding any interaction with Laura. When my parents commented on his subdued behavior, Laura smoothly explained it as pre-dinner anxiety and suggested he was overwhelmed by having grandparents visit. Then, 20 minutes before my parents were scheduled to arrive, Laura suddenly dumped the entire dinner into the garbage disposal. "I'm so sorry," she said, appearing genuinely distressed. "I think I oversalted the lamb and the vegetables are burnt. I can't serve this to your parents. They'll think I'm a terrible cook." I stared at her in confusion. The food had smelled delicious, and Laura was normally meticulous about her cooking. She'd spent hours preparing this meal specifically to impress my parents. "Are you sure?" I asked, looking at what appeared to be perfectly cooked lamb disappearing down the disposal. "It looked fine to me." "Trust me," Laura said firmly. "A woman knows when her cooking isn't up to standard. Let's just order pizza and explain that we had a kitchen mishap. Your parents will understand." Tommy, who had been watching this entire exchange from the kitchen doorway, looked visibly relieved when Laura disposed of the food. The change in his demeanor was so obvious that even I couldn't miss it. For the first time in weeks, my son seemed to breathe normally. The evening proceeded with takeout pizza and polite conversation, but I couldn't stop thinking about Laura's sudden decision to throw away hours of careful preparation. My parents were gracious about the kitchen mishap, but I noticed Tommy actually ate 3 pieces of pizza, more food than he'd consumed in any single meal since our wedding. "See?" Laura said later as we cleaned up. "Sometimes simpler is better." Tommy was much more relaxed with casual food. But I'd seen Tommy's reaction when Laura discarded her carefully prepared meal. It wasn't relief about having pizza instead of lamb. It was relief about not having to eat something Laura had cooked. The breakthrough came 3 days later when I left the hospital early due to a canceled surgery. I'd texted Laura that I was coming home but received no response. As I pulled into our driveway, I noticed Tommy sitting alone on the front porch steps, still in his school clothes at 4:30 p.m. "Hey, buddy," I said, sitting beside him. "Where's Laura?" "She's in the garden," Tommy said quietly. "She spends a lot of time there now, more time than with me." I looked toward our backyard, where Laura had created an elaborate botanical garden since moving in. She'd explained it as her therapeutic hobby, growing medicinal herbs and exotic plants for her wellness practice. The garden had become her obsession, consuming hours every day as she tended to plants I couldn't identify. What troubled me most was the clinical precision with which she approached her gardening. Laura didn't garden like someone who enjoyed flowers. She gardened like someone conducting botanical research. She kept detailed logs of plant growth, harvest timing, and extraction procedures that seemed far more sophisticated than anything required for herbal tea blends. "Tommy," I said carefully, "is everything okay? You haven't been eating much lately, and I'm worried about you." My son looked up at me with Sarah's green eyes, and I saw something there that made my chest tighten. Fear. Deep, genuine fear. "Daddy," he whispered, glancing toward the backyard. "I need to tell you something important, but not here. Can we go inside?" We went to his room, and Tommy closed the door carefully before pulling out a small digital recorder from under his mattress. The voice-activated device I'd given him last Christmas to record his nature observations. "I've been recording things," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "Things Laura says when she thinks I'm not listening. Things about her plants. Things about what happened to her other husbands." The blood in my veins turned to ice water. "Other husbands?" Tommy nodded solemnly. "She's been married before, Daddy. Lots of times." and all her husbands died. He pressed play on the recorder. Laura's voice came through clearly, apparently from a phone conversation. The foxglove is almost ready. Another few weeks of careful cultivation and I'll have enough concentrated digitalis to... Yes, I know it's risky, but David's life insurance policy is worth $3, $2 million, plus the house and his medical practice equity. The boy will need a guardian, of course, and who better than his devoted stepmother? My hands were shaking as Tommy stopped the recording. There's more, Daddy. Lots more. She talks to someone on the phone almost every day about her previous successes and how pediatricians are ideal targets because they're trusted by everyone and have substantial life insurance requirements. The room felt like it was spinning. Foxglove, digitalis. Every pediatric cardiologist knew that digitalis was derived from foxglove plants and was highly toxic in concentrated doses. It could cause cardiac arrhythmias that would look like a natural heart attack, especially in someone with no known cardiac issues. Tommy, I said, my voice barely steady. How long have you known about this? Since the first week after you got married, he said. I saw her cutting up foxglove leaves in the kitchen when she thought I was asleep. Then I heard her on the phone talking about cardiac glycosides and undetectable concentrations. I looked it up online at school. My 8-year-old son had basically conducted his own criminal investigation. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Tommy's eyes filled with tears. I tried, Daddy. Remember when I said Laura's food tasted funny? Remember when I kept asking if you felt okay after dinner? I was scared she was already putting the poison in our food, so I stopped eating when she cooked. Everything clicked into place. Tommy's weight loss, his refusal to eat, his withdrawn behavior. He'd been protecting both of us by avoiding potentially contaminated food. My 8-year-old son had been conducting surveillance on a serial killer. There's more evidence, Tommy continued, pulling out a small notebook from his backpack. I wrote down all the time she digs up plants at night. I took pictures of her lab setup in the basement, and I found information about her previous husbands online. The notebook was meticulously organized like a detective's case file. Tommy had documented Laura's late-night gardening activities, photographed suspicious equipment in our basement that I'd assumed was for her therapy practice, and somehow researched public records about her past marriages. Look at this, Daddy, Tommy said, showing me printouts he'd made at the school library. Laura Chen has been married 4 times in the last 12 years. Robert Chen died of a heart attack at 42. Michael Wong died of cardiac complications at 38. James Morrison died of sudden cardiac arrest at 44. And David Kim died of heart failure at 41. All relatively young men. All deaths involving cardiac issues. All with substantial life insurance policies, based on the obituaries Tommy had printed out. She always keeps the last husband's name, Tommy observed with the analytical mind Sarah had recognized in him. That's how I found the pattern. She's not Laura Chen because she's Asian. She's Laura Chen because that was her first husband's name. I stared at my son, realizing I was looking at a child who had potentially saved both our lives through his own investigation. But I was also looking at an 8-year-old boy who'd been living in fear for weeks, believing his stepmother was planning to murder his father. And Daddy, Tommy added quietly, I think she threw away the dinner when Grandma and Grandpa came because she didn't want to poison them too. She only wants to poison you. The implication hit me like a physical blow. Laura had prepared a poisoned meal specifically for me, but when my parents arrived unexpectedly, she couldn't risk accidentally killing them. So she disposed of the evidence and ordered pizza instead. That's why you looked so relieved when she threw the food away, I said. Tommy nodded. I was scared all day that she was going to poison you in front of Grandma and Grandpa. When she threw it away, I knew we were safe that night. I pulled my son into a tight hug, overwhelmed by the realization that this child had been carrying the weight of protecting us both for weeks. He'd figured out Laura's plan, gathered evidence, and even recognized when immediate danger was present, all while maintaining the appearance of normal childhood adjustment difficulties. Tommy, this is incredibly important evidence, but I need you to promise me something. Don't eat anything Laura prepares, don't drink anything she gives you, and stay close to me until we figure this out. I already wasn't eating her food, Tommy said. But Daddy, I'm scared she's going to hurt you soon. She's been cutting more foxglove leaves and she keeps asking if you've been feeling tired lately. The next hour was a blur of phone calls and planning. First, I called my brother Mark, a detective with the Philadelphia Police Department, and arranged to meet him immediately. Then I called my attorney to discuss emergency custody protection for Tommy. Finally, I called the hospital to inform them I had a family emergency and wouldn't be available for the next 24 hours. Mark arrived within 30 minutes, still in his detective gear from an earlier case. He listened to Tommy's recordings with the focused intensity of a 20-year police veteran, taking notes and occasionally asking Tommy clarifying questions that my son answered with remarkable precision. David, this kid has basically built a prosecutable case, Mark said after reviewing all of Tommy's evidence. The recordings alone establish intent and method. The research on previous husbands establishes pattern. The photographs of the basement lab setup show means and preparation. What's our next step? I asked. We need to catch her in the act. If she's planning to poison you, we need evidence of her actually preparing or administering the toxin. Tommy's recording suggests she's close to implementing her plan. We developed a strategy that would allow Tommy and me to remain safe while gathering the final evidence needed for arrest and prosecution. Mark would coordinate with a special victims unit detective who specialized in domestic poisoning cases. We would install hidden cameras in the kitchen and basement, and I would pretend to be unaware of Laura's plan while monitoring everything she prepared for consumption. I want to help catch her, Tommy said seriously. She's a bad person who hurt other daddies, and she wants to hurt you too. Mark looked at my son with professional respect. Tommy, you've already done incredible detective work, but now we need to let the adults handle the dangerous part. As we planned our operation, I couldn't help but think about Laura's performance with my parents. She'd been absolutely convincing as the devoted stepmother, discussing child psychology theories and expressing concern about Tommy's adjustment. My parents had left that evening completely convinced that Laura was perfect for our family. She's good at this, I told Mark. She's fooled everyone, my parents, my colleagues, even the background check we ran before the wedding. Serial killers often are masters of manipulation, Mark replied. But she made one critical mistake. She underestimated your son's intelligence and observational skills. The next phase of our operation began that evening when Laura returned from her garden with a basket of freshly cut plants, including several foxglove stalks. I pretended to read medical journals in the living room, while hidden cameras recorded her activities in the kitchen and basement. Tommy, meanwhile, stayed close to me, maintaining his pattern of avoiding Laura's food while appearing to act normally. We'd agreed that he would continue his adjustment difficulties behavior to avoid suspicion while we gathered final evidence. David, Laura said over dinner that night, you look tired. Have you been working too hard at the hospital? Just the usual stress, I replied, carefully avoiding the herbal tea she'd prepared. Cardiac surgery schedules are always demanding. You should let me make you some of my special relaxation tea, she suggested. I've been cultivating some wonderful medicinal herbs in the garden. They're particularly effective for stress-related cardiac issues. Tommy and I exchanged the briefest glance. Laura was essentially offering to poison me with plants designed to cause cardiac problems. That's very thoughtful, I said. Maybe this weekend when I have more time to relax. Laura smiled, but I noticed her jaw tighten slightly. Of course, this weekend would be perfect. After Tommy went to bed, Laura spent 2 hours in the basement, preparing her therapeutic compounds. The hidden cameras captured everything: sophisticated distillation equipment, precise measurement of plant extracts, and methodical preparation of what appeared to be concentrated digitalis solution. Mark reviewed the footage that night and confirmed our suspicions. She's preparing enough cardiac glycoside to kill a horse, he said. This isn't a crime of passion. This is calculated, premeditated murder, using sophisticated botanical chemistry knowledge. The investigation into Laura's background revealed even more disturbing information. She'd been using multiple identities across different states, always targeting recently widowed professionals with substantial assets and young children. The pattern was consistent: a whirlwind romance, quick marriage, followed by the mysterious death of the husband within 6 to 8 months. "She's what we call a black widow killer," Mark explained, "but with a specific focus on medical professionals. Doctors have high life insurance requirements, trusted reputations that make suspicious deaths less likely to be investigated, and often work demanding schedules that explain stress-related health issues." Tommy had been right about everything. Laura wasn't just a serial killer, she was a predator who specialized in targeting fathers like me, leaving children orphaned and traumatized while she collected insurance money and moved on to the next victim. The final confrontation came 3 days later. Laura had prepared what she called a special celebration dinner to mark our 1-month wedding anniversary. She'd cooked my favorite meal, grilled salmon with herbs, and had prepared her signature herbal tea blend. Tommy and I knew this was the moment she planned to implement her murderous scheme. Mark and 2 other detectives were positioned outside our house, monitoring everything through hidden cameras and audio equipment. As soon as Laura added her concentrated plant extract to my tea, they would have definitive evidence of attempted murder. "To new beginnings," Laura said, raising her wine glass as we sat down to dinner. "To family," I replied, watching as she carefully poured my tea from a special pot she'd prepared separately. Tommy picked at his food, maintaining his established pattern while staying alert to everything happening around him. Laura's attention was focused entirely on ensuring I consumed the poisoned tea. "Try the tea, David," she said after I'd eaten most of my salmon. "I blended it specifically for you. It contains several herbs that are excellent for cardiac health." I raised the cup to my lips, pretending to take a sip while actually avoiding contact with the liquid. "It smells wonderful. What herbs did you use?" "Oh, several varieties from my garden," Laura said, her eyes fixed on my cup. "Foxglove for heart strength, oleander for circulation, and a few other botanical extracts that work synergistically." Both foxglove and oleander were highly toxic cardiac plants. She'd essentially just confessed to attempted murder while describing her poison recipe. That's when Mark and his team burst through the front door. "Philadelphia police! Nobody move!" Laura's face went through a remarkable transformation. From loving wife to calculating predator to trapped criminal in the span of about 3 seconds. She looked at Tommy, then at me, and finally at the teacup in my hand. "You didn't drink it," she said, her voice now completely different from the nurturing tone she'd used for months. "No," I said, setting down the cup carefully. "My son figured out your plan weeks ago." Laura turned to stare at Tommy with something approaching professional respect. "The boy knew?" "I've been recording you," Tommy said quietly but firmly. "I know about all your other husbands. I know about your poison plants. And I know you don't really love my daddy. You just want his money." As the detectives arrested Laura, she maintained an eerie calm that suggested this wasn't her first encounter with law enforcement. During processing, they discovered she'd been using multiple identities across different states and had been investigated in connection with at least 6 suspicious deaths of wealthy men over the past 15 years. "How did you know?" she asked me as they led her away in handcuffs. I looked at Tommy, who was standing beside me with quiet pride in his eyes. "I didn't know. My son saved both our lives by being more observant than any adult in this situation." The toxicology analysis of Laura's herbal tea revealed enough concentrated cardiac glycosides to cause fatal arrhythmias within 30 minutes of consumption. The basement laboratory contained equipment and plant extracts sufficient to poison dozens of people. And the investigation into her previous marriages revealed a pattern of targeting successful professionals with substantial life insurance policies and minimal family connections. During her interrogation, Laura revealed the full extent of her operation. She'd been working with an accomplice, her supposed colleague from the phone conversations Tommy had recorded, who helped identify targets and forge documents. They'd been operating across multiple states for over a decade, accumulating millions of dollars in life insurance payouts. Your son disrupted a very sophisticated criminal enterprise, Mark told me later. If Tommy hadn't figured out her plan, you would have been victim number 7, and she would have disappeared with your insurance money before anyone suspected murder. 3 months later, Laura pleaded guilty to attempted murder, insurance fraud, and multiple counts of suspected homicide in other jurisdictions. She received a life sentence without possibility of parole. Her accomplice was arrested in Florida and also received life imprisonment. Tommy and I started family counseling to help him process the trauma of living with a potential murderer for several weeks. But honestly, he seemed to handle the situation better than most adults would have. His analytical mind and natural curiosity, the traits Sarah had recognized and nurtured, had literally saved our lives. "I miss Mommy," Tommy told me during one of our sessions, "but I think she would be proud that I protected you." I thought about Sarah's last words about nurturing Tommy's curiosity and not letting anyone dim his light. Laura had tried to do exactly that, dim both our lights permanently. But Tommy's intelligence, observational skills, and courage had prevented a tragedy that could have destroyed multiple families. My parents were horrified when they learned the truth about Laura. "We encouraged you to marry a serial killer," my mother said, tears in her eyes. "How could we have been so wrong about her?" "She was a professional," I explained. "She'd been perfecting her act for 15 years. The only person who saw through her was an 8-year-old boy with extraordinary intuition." 6 months later, Tommy started a junior detective club at school where kids learned basic observation and critical thinking skills. He wanted to teach other children how to notice important things and ask good questions. The school psychologist said it was an excellent way for him to process his experience while helping others develop similar protective instincts. "Daddy," Tommy said one evening as we worked on homework together, "I'm glad Laura is in jail, but I'm also glad I learned I can figure out important things when I need to." "You saved our lives, buddy. You're the bravest person I know." "I think Mommy helped me," he said simply. "She always told me to pay attention to how people make me feel, not just what they say. Laura made me feel scared, even when she was saying nice things." Children's intuition, it turns out, is often more accurate than adult rationalization. Tommy had recognized danger long before I was willing to acknowledge it. His refusal to eat wasn't childhood stubbornness. It was survival instinct. The most chilling part of the entire experience was realizing how close Laura had come to succeeding. If my parents hadn't insisted on that family dinner, if Tommy hadn't been brave enough to share his recordings, if I hadn't trusted my son's intelligence over expert psychological explanations, Laura would have poisoned me successfully and gained custody of Tommy as his grieving stepmother. Sometimes the most dangerous predators are the ones who appear most nurturing on the surface. Laura had fooled family courts, insurance companies, and several intelligent men over the years. But she couldn't fool an 8-year-old boy who understood that actions matter more than words, and that sometimes the people who claim to love you most are actually planning your destruction. I learned that trusting my son's judgment wasn't just good parenting, it was literally a matter of life and death. Tommy learned that his analytical mind and courage could protect the people he loved most. And together we learned that family isn't just about blood or marriage certificates. It's about people who genuinely care about each other's well-being and safety. Laura thought she was targeting another naive widower with a vulnerable child. Instead, she encountered a father-son team who proved that love, intelligence, and careful observation could triumph over even the most calculating evil. The foxglove plants in our garden were destroyed by a hazmat team. Tommy and I planted tomatoes and sunflowers in their place. Things that nourish life instead of ending it. Subscribe if you agree.